Sarah twisted her wedding ring nervously as she helped set the table for Sunday dinner, watching her mother-in-law Patricia inspect every piece of silverware for water spots. The woman's perfectly manicured nails clicked against each fork and spoon, her lips pursed in that familiar expression of disapproval that Sarah had grown to dread over the past 5 years. "Oh dear," Patricia sighed, holding up a slightly clouded wine glass. "Still having trouble with that discount dishwasher of yours?" The way she said discount made it sound like a personal failing. Sarah bit her tongue. She and Mike had bought the dishwasher secondhand when they first moved into their modest starter home, determined to build their life together from scratch without relying on his family's money. Patricia had never forgiven them for that decision, especially Sarah, whom she blamed for corrupting her son with working-class values. "The dishwasher works just fine, Patricia," Sarah replied evenly, continuing to lay out the plates. "But you're welcome to rewash anything that's not up to your standards." Mike appeared in the doorway, looking tense. He'd been on the phone for the past hour, which wasn't normal for a Sunday. Something was off about him. His usual easygoing smile was nowhere to be seen. "Mom," he said quietly, "we need to talk." "What is it, darling?" Patricia's voice shifted instantly to the sugary, sweet tone she reserved exclusively for her son. She set down the wineglass and turned to face him, but Mike didn't meet her eyes. Sarah noticed his hands were shaking slightly. In 5 years of marriage, she'd only seen him this rattled once before, the night he decided to turn down his father's offer to join the family investment firm and start his own small business instead. "Maybe we should sit down," Mike suggested, pulling out a chair from the dining table. Patricia's perfectly lined eyebrows drew together. "Michael, you're scaring me. What's going on?" Sarah started to excuse herself to give them privacy, but Mike caught her hand. "Stay," he said softly. "You should hear this too." The three of them sat at the table, the carefully arranged place settings now forgotten. Patricia's French manicured fingers drummed against the mahogany surface, a nervous tell that reminded Sarah suddenly, startlingly, that beneath all that carefully maintained perfection, her mother-in-law was human after all. "The SEC contacted me this morning," Mike finally said, "about Dad's firm." Patricia's fingers went still. "What about it?" Mike took a deep breath. "They've been investigating for months. He's been running a Ponzi scheme. The whole firm, everything, it's all built on fraud. They're moving in tomorrow to seize the assets." Patricia's face went ash white. "That's impossible. Your father would never—" "He confessed, Mom. He called me this morning to warn me. He's already left the country." The silence that followed was deafening. Sarah watched her mother in, Law's perfectly composed facade crack, then shatter. The woman who had spent years looking down her nose at Sarah's modest upbringing, who had made countless snide remarks about their tiny house and their careful budgeting, suddenly seemed to shrink in her chair. But our accounts." Patricia's voice had lost its usual polished edge. "The house, the cars, my investments, all frozen," Mike said gently. "And most of the money, it was never real to begin with. Dad was using new investments to pay returns to older clients. Classic pyramid scheme." Sarah felt a wave of complicated emotions wash over her: shock, anger at her father-in, Law's betrayal, and an unsettling mix of pity and vindication as she watched Patricia's world collapse. Patricia's hands flew to her throat, clutching the pearl necklace she always wore. The one she'd bragged was an anniversary gift from back when 30,000 was just pocket change to Richard. "This can't be happening," she whispered. "There must be some mistake." "Mom." Mike reached across the table, but Patricia jerked away from his touch. "No, call your father right now. He'll explain everything." Her voice took on a shrill edge. "Where did you say he was?" "He didn't tell me. Just said he was somewhere they couldn't extradite him." Mike's voice cracked. "He said to tell you he was sorry." Sarah watched as the words hit Patricia like physical blows. "Sorry. Sorry for stealing their client's life savings. Sorry for abandoning his wife of 35 years. Sorry for destroying their family's reputation." What kind of apology could possibly cover all that? The diamond-encrusted watch on Patricia's wrist, another gift from Richard, caught the light as she pressed her hands to her face. Sarah remembered all the times that watch had been deliberately flashed in her direction, accompanied by comments about the value of quality and investing in proper things. "What am I going to do?" Patricia's whisper was barely audible. "Where will I go?" Sarah felt Mike's hand tighten around hers under the table. She knew what he was thinking before he said it, and for a moment, a petty part of her wanted to object. After all the years of subtle jabs and condescension, but then she looked at Patricia, really looked at her, and saw past the designer clothes and perfect makeup to the lost, frightened woman beneath. Someone who'd just lost everything she'd built her identity around, who'd been betrayed by the man she trusted most. "You'll stay with us," Sarah heard herself say. Mike's hand squeezed hers gratefully. "We have the guest room upstairs. It's small, but—" "Small?" Patricia gave a strange, hollow laugh. "My closet is bigger than your guest room." The old Sarah would have bristled at the comment, but now she recognized it for what it was. Not snobbery, but fear. Fear of how far she was about to fall. "Well," Sarah said softly, "maybe it's time to learn that size isn't everything. That's a lesson Mike and I figured out pretty early on." Patricia's eyes darted between them, mascara starting to run down her cheeks. "Why would you help me? After everything I've said, everything I've done?" "Because that's what family does," Mike said simply. "Real family." Patricia stared at her untouched water glass, the one she'd been criticizing moments earlier. I don't know how to live like." She gestured vaguely at their modest dining room. "Like normal people?" Sarah finished quietly. "It's not as terrible as you think. Mike and I built this life from scratch, remember? No family money, no connections, just hard work and careful planning. But I don't know how to." Patricia's voice cracked. "I don't even know how to do my own laundry." For the first time in their complicated relationship, Sarah felt something close to understanding. Patricia's privileged lifestyle hadn't just been about status or showing off. It was the only world she knew how to exist in. "We'll teach you," Mike said. "We can help you find a job, show you how to budget." "A job?" Patricia looked horrified. "I haven't worked since before you were born. Who would hire me?" "My friend Lisa owns a boutique downtown," Sarah offered. "She's always looking for someone with good taste and knowledge of high-end fashion. You certainly have that." A tear rolled down Patricia's cheek, leaving a dark trail of mascara. "I've been awful to you both, haven't I?" Mike exchanged a look with Sarah before answering. "You've been, protecting what you thought was important, but maybe this is a chance to figure out what really matters." Patricia dabbed at her eyes with a linen napkin, then looked at it in dismay at the makeup stains. I always wanted the best for you, Michael. I thought that meant the right connections, the right lifestyle. Your father and I worked so hard to give you everything." She laughed bitterly. "Or at least I thought we did. Turns out it was all stolen money." "Mom," Mike said gently, "the best thing you and Dad ever gave me was the chance to meet Sarah, even if you didn't mean to." Sarah remembered that party, one of the countless society events Patricia had pushed Mike to attend. She'd been there catering, trying to build her small business. She'd spilled champagne on Mike's designer suit, and instead of getting angry, he'd helped her clean up and ask for her number. "You were so angry when we started dating," Mike continued, "but Sarah taught me what real success looks like. It's not about the big house or the fancy car. It's about being proud of what you've built yourself." Patricia looked around their dining room with new eyes. "And you are? Proud of all this?" "Every single day," Sarah said firmly. Patricia stood up suddenly, swaying slightly. "I need some air." She headed for the back door, then paused with her hand on the knob. "The garden. It's lovely." "I never said that before, did I?" Sarah followed her mother in, Law's gaze to the small backyard where she'd spent countless weekends planting flowers and vegetables. Another thing Patricia had once sneered at, playing in the dirt like a child. "Thank you," Sarah said. "Would you like to see it?" They walked out together, leaving Mike to make some calls. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the raised beds where tomatoes and peppers were starting to ripen. "You grew all this?" Patricia asked, touching a marigold petal with trembling fingers. "From seeds. It takes time, but there's something satisfying about watching things grow." "Things you can't buy," Patricia murmured. She sank onto the wooden bench Mike had built last summer. "Everything I was bought, nothing I actually created myself." Sarah sat beside her, maintaining a careful distance. "It's never too late to start creating." "At my age?" Patricia's laugh was watery. "I wouldn't even know where to begin." "Tomorrow," Sarah said. "We can start tomorrow. But right now, maybe you'd like to help me finish getting dinner ready. I'm making lasagna from my grandmother's recipe." "I've never cooked anything more complicated than toast," Patricia admitted, then added with a ghost of her old haughtiness, "Why would I? We had Henri." "Had?" "The chef." Patricia's face crumpled again. "I suppose he'll have to be let go, along with the housekeeper, the gardener, She trailed off, overwhelmed. Sarah stood up and held out her hand. "Come on, cooking is good therapy." And this recipe has been helping my family through hard times since the Great Depression. Patricia stared at Sarah's offered hand, the nails short and practical, traces of dirt under them from the garden. Then, slowly, she took it and let herself be pulled to her feet. In the kitchen, Sarah tied an apron around her waist and handed another to Patricia, who held it like it might bite. First lesson? Sarah said, pulling out ingredients. Real sauce doesn't come from a jar. For the first time that day, Patricia's lips curved in something close to a genuine smile. I suppose I have a lot to learn. As they worked together in the kitchen, Sarah noticed small changes in Patricia's demeanor. The rigid posture began to soften. Her hands, initially hesitant to touch raw ingredients, gradually became more confident as she learned to crush garlic and tear basil leaves. My mother would be horrified, Patricia said, flour dusting her expensive blouse. She always said ladies don't do manual labor. She paused, layering pasta sheets in the baking dish. Maybe that's why I became the way I was. Sarah added more sauce to a corner that looked dry. Tell me about her. She was like me. Worse, actually. Everything had to be perfect, had to look right. When I married Richard, she was thrilled, not because I was happy, but because of his family's money and status. Patricia's hands stilled. I did the same thing to you and Michael, didn't I? You did, Sarah agreed quietly. But you're here now, learning something new. That's more than your mother ever did, right? Through the kitchen window, they could see Mike pacing in the backyard, still on the phone. Probably talking to lawyers, Sarah thought. He's so much stronger than I ever gave him credit for, Patricia murmured. Both of you are. Mike came back inside as they were pulling the lasagna from the oven. The rich aroma of tomatoes and herbs filled the kitchen, making even Patricia's eyes widen appreciatively. That actually smells incredible, she admitted, sounding surprised. Just wait until you taste it, Mike said, managing a small smile despite the strain still evident on his face. Sarah's cooking was one of the things that made me realize I didn't need fancy restaurants to be happy. They sat down at the table, the same table where their world had shifted just hours ago. The expensive wine glasses Patricia had criticized earlier were filled with simple water. The slightly cloudy surfaces caught the evening light, creating prisms on the tablecloth. I spoke to our lawyer, Mike said, serving the lasagna. He's going to help us navigate the legal side of things. And I called the realtor. We can start looking at apartments for you once things settle down. Patricia nodded numbly, then looked down at her plate. I don't know how to thank you both. You can start by trying the food, Sarah said gently, before it gets cold. Patricia took a small bite, then a larger one. This is actually better than Henri's cooking. They ate in silence for a few minutes, each lost in their own thoughts. Sarah watched Patricia take careful, measured bites, her table manners still perfect even as her world crumbled around her. The FBI will want to talk to you, Mom, Mike finally said, about Dad's activities, his contacts, any unusual behavior you might have noticed. Patricia's fork clattered against her plate. I should have known, she whispered. All those late nights, the secret phone calls, the way he'd changed the subject whenever I asked about the firm's new investors. She looked up at Mike. Why didn't you join the firm when he offered? Did you suspect something? Mike shook his head. Number I wanted to build something of my own, something real. He reached for Sarah's hand. After meeting Sarah, seeing how she started her catering business from nothing, it inspired me. I wanted that feeling of earning my success. I called you foolish, Patricia said. I said you were throwing away your birthright for, what did I say? For common mediocrity? Sarah supplied quietly. Patricia flinched. God, I was horrible. And now look, your common mediocrity is the only thing standing between me and homelessness. It's not mediocrity, Sarah said firmly. What Mike and I have, what we've built, it's real. Every piece of furniture we save for, every repair we learn to do ourselves, every vegetable we've grown, it's all ours. Nobody can take it away because we earned it honestly. Patricia set down her fork, tears welling up again. Richard always said we earned our money too. He was so proud of the firm, of our lifestyle. Was any of it real? Was our whole marriage just another one of his lies? Mike reached across the table to take his mother's hand. I don't think so, Mom. Dad loved you. He just lost his way somewhere. Started believing that keeping up appearances was more important than being honest. Like mother, like father, Patricia said with a bitter laugh. We were quite a pair, weren't we? So focused on looking successful that we forgot to actually be good people. Sarah watched her mother in Law's face. seeing the masks of superiority and perfection crumbling away to reveal something raw and real underneath. The good news, Sarah said softly, is that it's never too late to change that story. Mike started clearing the plates, but Patricia stopped him. Let me, she said, standing up. I should learn how to do these things. The dishwasher's right there, Sarah said, then added with a slight smile. The discount one. Patricia actually blushed. I deserve that. She carefully stacked the plates. Though I suppose I'll have to get used to discount everything now. You know what I've learned? Sarah said, helping gather the silverware. The less something costs, the more satisfying it is when you make it work. Like that old dishwasher, Mike spent a whole weekend taking it apart and fixing it himself. Now every time it runs, we feel proud. Michael? Patricia looked at her son in surprise. You fixed an appliance? YouTube tutorials, he grinned. Same way I learned to fix the leaky faucet and patch the roof. Dad always said paying for repairs was smarter than doing them yourself, but doing things yourself means you're not dependent on anyone else. Patricia finished quietly. I'm starting to see the wisdom in that. The kitchen filled with the homey sounds of dishes being rinsed, the dishwasher being loaded, normal sounds, family sounds. Sarah, Patricia spoke up while drying her hands on a dish towel. That garden of yours, would you teach me? I mean, once I'm settled. I've never grown anything before, but maybe. Of course, Sarah said. We can start with something simple. Herbs, maybe. They're pretty forgiving for beginners. Forgiving, Patricia repeated softly. That's something else I need to learn about. She turned to face them both. I know saying sorry isn't enough. Not for years of looking down on you, judging your choices, trying to make you feel small just because you didn't live the way I thought you should. Mike moved to interrupt, but Patricia held up her hand. Please let me finish. I was wrong about everything. The way you live, the choices you've made. You're the ones who built something real, something honest. Her voice broke. While I was looking down my nose at your little house, I was living in a mansion built on lies. Sarah felt tears prick at her own eyes. Patricia. The worst part is, Patricia continued, I think I always knew something wasn't right, but I chose not to look too closely. It was easier to focus on criticizing you than examining my own life. That's the thing about big houses, Mike said, wrapping an arm around Sarah. They make great hiding places, for secrets, for doubts, for the parts of ourselves we don't want to face. Our little house doesn't have room for secrets, Sarah added, or pretenses. Patricia glanced toward the living room, where her designer suitcase sat, the only thing she'd brought with her for what was supposed to be a simple Sunday dinner. I have a whole closet full of designer clothes at home. She corrected herself. The FBI will probably take those too. We'll go shopping, Sarah offered. I know some great thrift stores. Thrift stores? Patricia looked horrified for a moment, then let out a shaky laugh. I suppose beggars can't be choosers anymore. Literally. You're not a beggar, Mike said firmly. You're family. And we take care of family. Even when they don't deserve it? Patricia asked quietly. Especially then, Sarah answered. Besides, you might find you like thrift shopping. It's like a treasure hunt, finding beautiful things that just need a second chance. Patricia's eyes met Sarah's, understanding passing between them. A second chance, she repeated. I'd like that. The evening light was fading outside, casting long shadows through the windows. Patricia stood looking at the family photos on the wall, simple frames holding genuine smiles. Her eyes lingered on Mike and Sarah's wedding picture. I didn't even come to the rehearsal dinner, she said softly. I told everyone I was sick, but really I was just angry that you chose to have it at that little Italian restaurant instead of the country club. Salvatore's, Sarah nodded, where we had our first date. Was it a nice evening? It was perfect, Mike said. Everyone relaxed, laughing, sharing stories. The owner, Mario, treated us like family. He kept bringing out extra dishes for everyone to try. Family, Patricia murmured. I've spent so much time trying to be part of the right family, the right social circle. And now, she turned back to them. Now the only family I have left is the one I tried so hard to change. Maybe, Sarah suggested, that's because we're the family you were supposed to have all along. The real one, not the perfect one. A car alarm went off somewhere in the distance, making Patricia jump. I should probably try to get some sleep. Tomorrow's going to be difficult. I'll help you get settled in the guest room, Sarah offered. We can put your things away and make up the bed. As they climbed the stairs, Patricia trailing behind her, Sarah could hear the soft creak of each step, a sound that used to embarrass her when Patricia visited. Now it just felt like home. The guest room was small but neat, with a quilted bedspread Sarah's grandmother had made and a simple wooden dresser Mike had refinished himself. Patricia stood in the doorway, taking it in. "It's cozy," she said, and for once there was no hidden criticism in her voice. "The bathroom's just across the hall," Sarah explained, opening dresser drawers. "There are fresh towels under the sink, and I'll get you some toiletries tomorrow." Patricia unzipped her suitcase, hands hovering over the carefully folded designer clothes inside. "I packed for dinner," she said with a hollow laugh. "Brought 3 outfit options because I couldn't decide what would make the best impression. Now they're probably the last nice clothes I'll ever own." "They're just clothes," Sarah said gently. "They don't define you." "Don't they?" Patricia pulled out a silk blouse. "Who am I without all this? I don't even know anymore." "You're Mike's mom," Sarah said simply. "And my mother-in-law. Everything else, that's something you get to figure out now." Patricia sat heavily on the edge of the bed, the silk blouse crumpling in her lap. "I don't know how to do this," she whispered. "How to be normal." "Nobody really does," Sarah admitted, sitting beside her. "We're all just figuring it out as we go along. The difference is, some of us admit it while others pretend they've got it all figured out. I was definitely in the second category, wasn't I?" Patricia smoothed the blouse absently, always acting like I had all the answers, looking down on anyone who lived differently. From downstairs came the sound of Mike loading the dishwasher, the clink of plates and normal household sounds floating up. Patricia closed her eyes, listening. "The first night is the hardest," Sarah said softly, "when everything feels strange and scary, but tomorrow morning the sun will come up and we'll figure out the next step, together." "Why are you being so kind to me?" Patricia asked. "After everything?" "Because 5 years ago, I was scared too. Starting a new life, trying to prove myself worthy of your son. And even though you didn't approve of me, you gave me one precious gift." "What was that?" "You raised a man who knows the difference between price and value." Patricia's hands stilled on the silk blouse. "All those years I spent teaching him about status and appearances, and somehow he learned about character instead." "Maybe he learned from watching what didn't work," Sarah suggested. "Sometimes our mistakes teach better lessons than our successes." "Is that what you think this is?" Patricia gestured around her. "A lesson?" "I think it's whatever you choose to make of it." Sarah stood up. "There are extra blankets in the closet if you get cold. And Patricia?" She paused at the door. "Don't be embarrassed if you need help figuring things out. Everyone needs help sometimes. Even you. Especially me. When I first started my catering business, I made so many mistakes, but each one taught me something, and I had Mike to lean on when things got tough." "And now I have both of you," Patricia said wonderingly. "Even though I never gave you a reason to support me." "Family isn't about keeping score," Sarah said. "Sometimes it's just about being there when someone needs you." She left Patricia sitting on the bed, still clutching the silk blouse like a lifeline to her old world. As she headed back downstairs, she heard a quiet sob from the guest room, the sound of someone finally letting go of a facade they'd held onto for far too long. Mike was waiting at the bottom of the stairs looking worried. "How is she?" "Processing," Sarah said, wrapping her arms around him. "It's a lot to take in. How are you holding up?" He buried his face in her hair. "I keep thinking about Dad. All those lectures about integrity and hard work. Was he laughing at me the whole time? When I turned down the job at his firm, he acted so disappointed. Was he really just relieved I wouldn't discover what he was doing? I don't think we'll ever know what was going through his mind," Sarah said softly. "But you made the right choice, following your own path." "Thanks to you." He pulled back to look at her. "You know, when I first met you at that party, Mom was horrified that I was talking to the help. I remember. She kept trying to introduce you to that banker's daughter, Amanda Whitmore." Mike chuckled. "Who, ironically, is now in jail for insider trading." They both sobered at that thought. From upstairs came the sound of the guest room door closing, then quiet footsteps. "What do we do now?" Mike asked. "We take it one day at a time," Sarah replied, "and we help her learn how to live in the real world." The kitchen clock ticked steadily as they sat at the counter, sharing the last piece of lasagna between them. Old habits died hard. Patricia would have been scandalized by such informal late-night eating. But those rules seemed meaningless now. "We should make a plan," Sarah said, always practical. "For tomorrow, I mean. The FBI will probably show up early." Mike nodded. I'll call into work, take a few days off to help sort things out. The business can run without me for a bit. Your own business, Sarah reminded him with a smile, that you built from scratch. Remember when Mom called it my little hobby company? He shook his head. Now it's probably worth more than Dad's entire firm, since his was all smoke and mirrors. They fell silent, each thinking about the strange twists life could take. The sound of running water came from upstairs, Patricia figuring out the shower, probably. Such a simple thing that would never have crossed her mind before. She's going to need clothes, Sarah said. And basic things. Toothbrush, shampoo. A lesson in how to use a washing machine, Mike added. One step at a time, Sarah squeezed his hand. We'll get through this. Morning came with a harsh dose of reality. The FBI agents arrived at 7 a.m. sharp, their dark SUVs looking out of place in the quiet suburban street. Patricia came downstairs already dressed in yesterday's clothes, her face bare of makeup but her spine straight with dignity. Mrs. Harrison, one of the agents stepped forward. We need to ask you some questions about your husband's business activities. Sarah watched from the kitchen as Patricia nodded and followed them into the living room. Mike hovered nearby, ready to step in if needed, but Patricia waved him off. I'll be fine, she said. I need to do this myself. For the next 2 hours, they could hear the low murmur of voices as Patricia answered questions about bank accounts, property holdings, and suspicious transactions. Her voice never wavered, even when describing the lifestyle she'd lost. She's stronger than I thought, Sarah murmured to Mike as they pretended to busy themselves with breakfast dishes. She's a Harrison, Mike said, then corrected himself. No, she's just... Mom, maybe for the first time in her life, she's just being herself. When the agents finally left, Patricia remained sitting on the couch staring at her hands. But there were no tears this time. Sarah brought over a cup of tea, setting it gently beside Patricia. How are you holding up? They're seizing everything, Patricia said quietly. The house, the cars, the vacation properties, even my jewelry. They said it was all bought with stolen money, so it's evidence. She touched her bare throat where her pearl necklace used to rest. The FBI had taken that too. 35 years of marriage, she continued, and all I have left is what's in that suitcase upstairs. Mike sat down across from her. What did they say about Dad? They think he's in a non-extradition country, probably somewhere in Southeast Asia. Patricia's lips twisted in a bitter smile. He always did love Thailand. All those business trips he took. I wonder now if he was setting this up all along, planning his escape route. Sarah noticed Patricia's hands were steady as she picked up the teacup. No more trembling, no more panic, just quiet acceptance. The agent said I'm not under investigation, Patricia added. They believe I didn't know anything about the scheme. Small mercies, I suppose. That's good news, Mike said. It means you can start fresh without legal complications. Start fresh, Patricia repeated. At 62 years old. Sarah sat down beside her mother-in-law. You know what my grandmother used to say? Life keeps teaching the same lesson until you learn it. Maybe this is your chance to learn something new. Your grandmother sounds wise, Patricia said. Unlike me, I was so busy teaching everyone else how to live that I never learned anything myself. She took another sip of tea. This is good. What kind is it? Chamomile and mint from the garden, Sarah replied. Cost almost nothing to grow. And better than the fancy imported tea I used to buy, Patricia admitted. She set down the cup. I need to find a job. I've never had a resume in my life, but I need to start somewhere. About that, Sarah said. I called Lisa at the boutique this morning. She'd love to meet with you tomorrow. She says anyone who can spot a fake Hermes at 20 paces would be an asset to her shop. For the first time since the FBI left, Patricia's face brightened slightly. I can do that. I spent years learning to tell genuine luxury items from counterfeits. Ironic, isn't it? I was so concerned about fake handbags while my whole life was a fraud. Not your whole life, Mike said firmly. Just the parts Dad built on lies. The rest is still yours to rebuild. Patricia looked around the modest living room, taking in details she'd previously dismissed, the handmade throw pillows Sarah had sewn, the coffee table Mike had restored, family photos in simple frames. I used to think living like this would be a nightmare, she confessed. Having to work for everything, counting pennies, living without status. She smoothed her wrinkled silk blouse. But the real nightmare was waking up to find out my whole life was built on stealing from others. Mom, Mike said gently, you didn't know. Didn't I? Patricia's voice sharpened. Or did I choose not to know? All those investor meetings at our house. Those nervous clients asking questions. I told myself it wasn't my business, that a good wife doesn't pry. She laughed harshly. A good wife. That's all I ever tried to be. The perfect corporate wife with the perfect life. Sarah reached out and took Patricia's hand. Then maybe it's time to find out who you are besides Richard's wife. I don't even know where to start. How about breakfast? Sarah suggested. I can teach you to make an omelet. Patricia looked startled. Now? Why not? Life goes on, even when everything changes. Especially then. In the kitchen, Patricia stood awkwardly as Sarah gathered ingredients. The woman who had once commanded household staff with military precision now looked lost facing a carton of eggs. First step, Sarah said, handing her an apron, is protecting your clothes. Though honestly, you might want to change into something more comfortable later. Silk doesn't do well with dish soap. Patricia fingered her blouse. Everything I packed is like this. I don't own a single piece of normal clothing. We'll fix that, Sarah promised. But for now, let's focus on breakfast. Watch how I crack the egg, just tap it gently on the counter's edge. Mike leaned in the doorway, watching his mother concentrate with almost comical intensity on the simple task. Her first attempt left shell fragments in the bowl, but her second try was perfect. Good job, Sarah encouraged. Now add a splash of milk. No, you don't need to measure exactly. Cooking isn't like your charity galas. Sometimes the best results come from intuition. Intuition, Patricia repeated softly. I've spent so long following rules. The right clothes, the right schools, the right friends. She whisked the eggs with growing confidence. Maybe that's why I never noticed what Richard was doing. I was too busy following the script. The smell of melting butter filled the kitchen as Patricia carefully tilted the pan just as Sarah had shown her. Her first omelet wasn't pretty, broken in places, slightly overcooked. But when she took a bite, her eyes widened in surprise. I made this, she said wonderingly. I actually made something with my own hands. The first of many things, Sarah said, starting another pan for Mike's breakfast. Just wait until you try baking bread. Or fixing a leaky faucet, Mike added with a grin. Patricia shook her head. One step at a time. Though I suppose I don't have much choice now. She took another bite. The FBI agent said they'll let me get some personal items from the house tomorrow. Clothes, toiletries, photos, under supervision, of course. We'll go with you, Mike offered. Thank you. But I think I need to do this alone. Patricia straightened her shoulders. I need to walk through that house one last time and see it for what it really was. A beautiful prison built with other people's stolen dreams. Sarah and Mike exchanged glances, recognizing the shift in Patricia's voice. Less polished society matron, more human being coming to terms with hard truths. I'll need boxes, Patricia continued, pushing her empty plate away. And to decide what's really worth keeping. What actually matters. That's the hardest part, Sarah said, but also the most freeing. When Mike and I were starting out, we had to be really intentional about everything we owned. It makes you appreciate what you have. Everything in that house, Patricia's voice caught. Every painting, every piece of furniture, every ridiculous decorative bowl, I spent so much time and energy choosing the perfect things. And now I know each one was bought with stolen money. Mike moved to sit beside his mother. You can build a new collection of things that actually mean something. Like this, Patricia picked up her empty plate, the one she'd criticized yesterday for its water spots. This morning it held the first meal I ever cooked for myself. That means more than all the fine china in my dining room. Sarah began clearing the breakfast dishes, but Patricia stood up. Let me, she said. I need to learn how to do these things. All these little tasks I've spent my life avoiding. They're part of being real, aren't they? They're part of being human, Sarah corrected gently. And you're already doing better at that than you think. Standing at the sink, washing dishes with hands that had never known dishwater before, Patricia suddenly laughed, a genuine sound without any of her usual social polish. What's funny? Mike asked. I was just thinking, all those years I spent looking down on your lifestyle, convinced you were throwing away your potential by choosing to live. Simply. She rinsed a plate carefully. And now here I am, learning that the simple things are the only real things I have left. Sarah dried the dishes Patricia handed her. You haven't lost everything, you know. You still have us. You still have time to build something new. Something honest, Patricia added. Though I have to admit, I'm terrified. Starting over at my age, learning basic things most people know by their 20s. Fear means you're growing, Mike said. That's what Sarah taught me when I was scared to start my own business. Patricia placed the last dish in the drying rack and turned to face them both, her expensive blouse splashed with water, her manicured hands pruned from dishwater, her carefully maintained facade finally cracking into something real and vulnerable and human. "Thank you," she said simply, "for showing me what family really means."